This episode is brought to you by Graham, Kim and Leo, and Adam, this week's newest patrons. What blue water boat is tough enough to cross the ocean, but small enough that a 5-year-old could dock it? Light enough to actually sail upwind, but thicker than a bowl of Grandma's oatmeal. Less than 35 feet, but bigger inside than Superman's phone booth. Cutter rigged enough to be considered a classic, but new enough to have a bow thruster. 150 grand enough to sort of make you a little bit squeamish. But I know what you're thinking, and it's not an island packet. This week on Everything You Need to Know, the $150,000 sailboat. That's right, 150 grand for an ocean-going cutter that's less than 35 feet long, but newer than an iPhone 4. You'd be crazy to not be thinking island packet. Tim, it's an island packet. But what if you just don't want an island packet? This, my friends, the first boat we're going to talk about today is a Gazard. And yes, Gazard sounds like a cross between a Thanksgiving turkey and a Canada goose that attacks people at the supermarket. But it's not. It's a sailboat company started by a Brit turned Canadian whose sole purpose seemed to be to take island packet down a notch or two. Ted Gazard was born in England where he apprenticed as a carpenter, but he earned his ticket in boat building before joining the Royal Air Force, as you did in the mid-1900s England. In 1959, when he left the RAF, he moved here to Canada, actually about 30 minutes from my house. He worked in construction, he supervised the building of houses and even whole subdivisions, but in his spare time, as you do, he went sailing. He sailed so much that he eventually quit construction and moved his family to the Caribbean for a few years to learn how to build different sailboats. In the Caribbean, Ted got a taste for multi-hulls, so when he came back to Canada, he built one. He called it Manta, and then he moved his family again and his boat. This time they moved to Bayfield, Ontario, which is sort of where most Canadian boat builders were at the time. Ted wasn't feeling computer-designed sailboat hulls, and he felt that he could carve a block of wood with his trained eye that would actually outperform anything else, so that's what he did. He made designs by hand, and he founded the Bayfield Boatyard, and he started building boats. Now, you may have heard of Bayfield, full keel, solid, go anywhere kind of boats with beautiful bowsprits and woodwork in traditional rigs. They're all over the place up here in the Great Lakes, and it's one of those boats that when you see one, you know exactly what it is. Now, when Ted sold his shares of Bayfield, he went on to found Gazard, where he built this thing. This is a Gazard 31, and it's a good-looking boat, even though the length is a reported 31 feet. When you add the bowsprit, it's actually 36. Add to that, it's got an 11-foot beam, and this boat is a lot bigger than you might think. Now, his Bayfield days had him designing full keel boats, but he left that behind in the Gazard, and he did a modified version with a skeg for the rudder. And Ted had sort of mixed beliefs. He was traditional, but he was also modern. He believed the hull should have enough of a forefoot to stop it from pounding into waves, but also room up front for a bow thruster. And while this boat looks very 1970s traditional, the hull was designed intelligently. It's got a 1/2-inch core to save weight, but then it's solid with lots of extra glass where it needs strength. This Gazard we're looking at today is a culmination of what started as a great boat, but evolved over the years to become an even better boat because this one is a Mark II. For the $155,000 ask here, we get a great-looking hull with that big, stable keel and a skeg out back to keep the steering safe. We also get a hard dodger, something that you'd see on a Halberg Razzie or an Amel. And we get that big, beautiful bowsprit that supports a huge sail plan that makes this boat actually move along pretty quickly. We also get a self-tacking jib, and we get a boom vang, so we can single-hand it without much effort. We even get a bow thruster because, while it may take its styling cues from the boats of yesterday, this boat is less than 10 years old. Inside, things get a little untraditional as well, with a small two-sided dinette and a charting area next to a good-sized galley. I guess we'd call this a kitchen with a breakfast nook. And remember, this boat's only 31 feet, so the main living area is actually moved forward, taking up the whole V-berth, with wraparound seating and lots of storage behind a lot of really beautiful woodwork. This is probably where you'd have your guests over for dinner. Now, aft of everything, we get a large wet head with lots and lots of counter space. And believe me, counter space is a huge luxury on a 31-footer. I mean, most of us are still putting cutting boards over the sink so that we have room to do anything. And we get lots of opening port lights for a more airy feeling inside, too. And opposite that, in the back, we get a really roomy aft cabin. And yes, an aft cabin on a 31-footer. Everything on this boat screams at least 36 feet, maybe 40, but it just isn't. You can still park this thing in little mom and pop marinas without breaking the bank. This Gazard is absolutely beautiful and rock solid in its craftsmanship, as all Gazards are. There's even room out back with the high coamings to be really comfortable on a long day at sea. This boat truly is everything an old salt could ask for, while also delivering a lot of what a more modern buyer might actually need. The only problem with this boat, honestly, as I can see it, is it's not an island packet. It's everything an island packet is. It's tough, it's beautiful, it's roomy, it's expensive, but it's called a Gazard. So if you're looking for a modern blue water boat, but it needs to be small enough that you can single-hand it or for whatever reason, this boat is one heck of a contender. Now, if that Gazard was designed for people who want a traditional style, heavy built boat that's small enough to be single-handed, then this next boat is for probably somebody else, someone who wants a more modern boat with a huge interior and just wants to sail down to the Caribbean as easily as possible in the lap of comfort, all the comfort you can get for 150 grand anyway. This, my friends, is an Oceanis 40. It's small enough to single-hand at 40 feet, but it's big enough for you and your spouse and your favorite traveling companion. The Oceanis 40 drafts just 5.5 feet, so it can actually go almost anywhere, but it's got a 13-foot beam, so you'll be able to go there with just about anyone in it. And at 18,000 pounds, it's also heavy enough to push some waves out of the way. And this is actually a freshwater boat. It's always been here, so the rig is probably going to be original, and it's likely going to be a decade before you even have to look at swapping the standing rigging. I particularly like this Oceanis because it has some flair to the design. I love that the side port lights aren't actually square, and all the lines seem to flow together. I don't usually say this about Benettos, but dare I say, this boat is actually pretty. Of course, though, it is a Benetto, so we get all that huge amount of space, but it's complemented by a lot of plastic tables and things like that. We do get the easy access off a huge sugar scoop, and this one is a twin helm, so I can always sit on the low side so that I can see the jib tails, and I kind of like that. The staging of this boat, though, disappoints me because it looks like someone just woke up in it, tidied up real quick, and snapped some pictures with a potato. Very randomly in no particular order. What we can see, however, is that this is, of course, a 40-footer. We get a nice functional galley on the port side with a huge, massive saloon for that day-to-day living. Putting the galley aft like that also makes the living area almost ridiculously big, and as someone who's lived on boats, I really like that. Up front, of course, we get a good-sized V-berth for the doggo to sleep in, but out back, we get a massive head with a shower that actually has doors. I would be so spoiled on this boat. The aft cabin is everything you'd expect from a big Benetto, and it's really, really roomy. And you also get a Yanmar that looks really well taken care of and clean. They say it only has some 400 hours on it. Honestly, the only real downside I see to this boat is that it's not already called Lady K. If I was buying a $150,000 boat right now, today, you'd be really hard-pressed to talk me out of this thing. It really is everything to the modern cruiser. It's everything you want and need, albeit it's short of any ocean-going goodies like davits or solar, but it's a freshwater boat. You probably can't expect those things. But on the plus side, it's not going to be all corroded. If the owner of this boat is watching right now, I will offer in trade a better potato, a promise to rename the boat, and to make it a YouTube personality sailing all over the tropics. And I'll throw in this mug. It's my good captain mug. I've been doing a lot of consulting lately for folks who are boat shopping, so if you need some help and you want to book an hour of my time, head on over to ladyksailing.com/consults to drop me a message. Also, Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make these videos possible. I really couldn't do them without you. If you'd like to help out with the videos, please consider becoming a patron. And speaking of newer boats that you might actually call pretty, and pictures that leave something to be desired, check out this freshwater Jeanneau 45. Now, I show you this boat not because I like it or I think you should buy it. I show you this because I think it's a perfect example of a blank canvas. The Jeanneau 45 isn't just a roomy boat that you could easily live on. It's also a performance hull, or at least performance oriented. So it goes fast and it's heavy enough to take on the Caribbean. And this one in particular hasn't been modified or molested into something that it's not. This is just a clean, good-looking example of a great boat just waiting for you to come along and kit it out to exactly what you want it to be. I would add davits and an enclosure, maybe a water maker. This is a clean slate of an example of a great boat. This boat also drafts just 5.5 feet, but the beam is 14.5, and it shows. This is a kind of thing that you see at boat shows with a huge inviting walk-through transom and massive cockpit that becomes a whole extra room of the boat if you slap an enclosure on it. The twin helms give you lots of space and equally great places to sit on either tack. And inside, it may look a bit disheveled in a couple of these weird pictures, but it's another massive saloon that you can actually see yourself living in. Unlike normal production boats though, the wood here actually looks kind of beautiful. It's usually all IKEA, but this is nice and we don't see that often. Now this layout, it's the 3-cabin layout. So in the back you get split aft cabins. They're kind of mirror images of each other, and they have the board in them in these pictures, which doesn't have to be there. But in the front you get a massive centerline stateroom, probably for the owner. Now, I get that some people don't want to sleep up in the bow of the boat, particularly if you're in an anchorage and it's a bit rough. But these aft cabins in this boat are so huge, you do have some options. Now, despite the pictures lacking a really good layout shot, you do get 2 heads in this boat, and you get a good-sized galley. Looking at the ad, you have to sort of remember this is a 45-footer with a near 15-foot beam, so use your imagination a little bit. The last boat I want to talk to you about today, I probably saved the best for last, because this thing's already been across the Atlantic a couple of times, and it spent a number of years cruising in the Med. It also spent some time in freshwater up here in the Great Lakes. This boat is, if nothing else, probably better traveled than you are. This is a 1987 Swan 46, and to say that she's already outfitted for cruising would be a laughable understatement. She's already got 440 amp hour battery bank, a water maker, a life raft, a 2500 watt inverter charger, solar panels, a 5 kilowatt generator, a B&G chart plotter and AIS, and of course that massive radar. And being the Swan, you also get teak everywhere on the top sides, which actually comes out beautifully in these pictures, though it does need maintenance. You get winches every 6 inches on the coach top, with a huge push pit around the mast and door aids everywhere to jam the fresh air down into the cabin. You get jib tracks that flank the rig, running all the way from the shrouds back to both massive sets of primary winches. This boat is meant to be sailed, and sailed hard, anywhere and everywhere you could ever want to go. When I look at this thing, I think about all the cool places that Delos has been. And if that's what you wanted to do, but you don't have $500,000 to buy an ML, then this Swan will do the job. In fact, it already has. Everything about this boat is overbuilt and solid. Inside this Swan, it's more the same. It's a boat designed for a life at sea. And while you get a lot of space, you also get places everywhere to brace yourself from falling over. You don't get the wide open spaces of the production boat, because you shouldn't. You just get a cabin that's meant to be lived in at a 30-degree heel while it bashes into whitecaps. And Swan even put the galley down the hallway to the aft cabin to make sure that you can still prepare a meal regardless of how bad the sea state is. And at the end of that hallway, an aft cabin you can actually live in. Now, this boat could obviously use some upgrading before the next big adventure. It has sort of everything, but some of it's getting pretty old. But I bet you it has tens of thousands of nautical miles left on this hull. And on the $149,000 price tag, I'd probably add about 30 grand to bring her up to date for the stuff that's important to me. And then I just set out into the ocean without batting an eye. That's it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe to see more of these videos. I will see you guys all next week. Until then, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down.